So what is a tariff? Very relevant to today's modern economic times, which prior to 2018 probably wasn't a tariff was not very relevant. It was kind of out of the vocabulary, but now it's more relevant than ever. So a tariff, simply put, is a tax placed on imports and exports by a governing body. The origins of a tariff are vaguely debatable, not really, but the first instance we see of a tariff was in Athens. The port of Piraeus enforced a levy on grains that came into the country to raise taxes for the Athenian government. However, it wasn't called a tariff at the time. It was just the first time in history we see taxes on imported goods. The next time we see tariffs in world history is the Tariff Act of 1789 by the United States. After ratifying the U.S. Constitution, after we created the United States government, the second bill after the Constitution was put into place, technically the first law of the land was the Tariff Act of 1789. This made it so that the U.S. federal government could collect money instead of having to beg the states for money. And it placed a 5% import tariff on all goods coming into the United States. Then shortly after that passing, the Anglo-American War, which was just a secondary war with Britain again, the tariffs went from 12.5% to 25% on all imported goods. So that was in 1812, and then after that war in 1816, American manufacturers said, "We like these tariffs; they're really helping us out." They basically doubled down on them, and the average tariff becomes 35%. And by 1820, so 8 years after they introduced doubling tariffs, by 1820 the rate was 40% of all goods into the United States were taxed, or a tariff of 40%. My head is in the way of all my great memes. There we go. Stonks. That's the founding fathers. That's a legitimate picture. This is a legitimate picture of the founding fathers creating tariffs. And then I have to go back. The next big time that we see the tariffs become a big deal is the American Civil War. While there were bigger reasons for the Civil War, tariffs were a couple of them that were cited. The South wanted no tariffs. The North wanted more tariffs. During the war, Abraham Henry Clay Tariff Whig Lincoln raised tariffs to 44% for the war effort and to make railroads, and then they continued to stay at 44% after the Civil War. And then we have Woodrow Wilson, who, unbeknownst to me, this was just while I found this in my research, Woodrow Wilson was like the goat of the godfather of modern economics, at least in America. So Woodrow Wilson comes in and he adopts the Tariff Act of 1913, or the Underwood tariffs. Then, coupled with the passing of the 16th Amendment, the U.S. government now has federal income taxes. The 16th Amendment being that it's legal for the federal government to collect taxes. And then the Underwood tariffs basically lowered. We'll move on to just Woodrow Wilson also created the Federal Reserve Act, which created the Federal Reserve and our central banking. So, I mean, this dude went from, we were basically just like, I don't even know how the economy worked up until this point. I took all these as a given. And then Woodrow Wilson comes in, creates the Federal Reserve, which gives us the ability to print money. Then he says we're going to make the 16th Amendment so that the federal government can collect taxes. And then we are going to make the Federal Reserve and use central banking. That is so much stuff that one person did. But then after he did all of this, money was changed in such a dramatic way that tariffs lowered from 44% on average down to 25%. And shortly after all this happened, World War I happened. And whenever there's a world war amongst, the world, tariffs are kind of not really useful because nobody's really shipping anything to you anyway. So after World War I, tariffs are essentially were non-existent, especially because now we have the Federal Reserve, central banking, and federal income tax. However, a few years pass after World War I happens, and there is the Great Depression. So, in the middle of the Great Depression, or shortly after the stock market crash of 1929, Herbert Hoover passed the Smoot-Hawley Act of 1930. So, basically, it just gave a lot of benefit. The idea being that it over tariffed Canadian and other importers like grains and other agricultural goods to help the American farmer. In turn, Canada, Britain, France, and pretty much everybody that we put a tariff on had retaliatory tariffs. And then most experts agreed that this made the Great Depression, even greater, even worse. And then thinking that the tariffs didn't work because of how long it took for the act to become law, the United States Congress passed the Reciprocal Tariff Act of 1934, which let the president negotiate tariffs with other countries. So this would be like, this kind of set a precedent of you can let the president negotiate on your behalf so long as like it's within your best interests. So they basically let the president do all their tariff negotiating for a number of years, next 20 years roughly. Ooh. Until we get to this point. Holy moly. I just had no respect for where my camera was going to be today. So right after World War II, we got to the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. So we got done, and basically at the Geneva Convention, we said we should have this General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. It was signed and was used until January 1st, 1995, when it became the World Trade Organization. Also, after creating the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the Reciprocal Tariff Act was not renewed. So the president now has lost his sole negotiating power. But the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade was made to reduce tariffs across all countries. So at the start of it in 1947, tariffs in most countries were 22%. By the time it changed over to the World Trade Organization in 1995, the average had lowered to 5%. So we got what we wanted out of that. And then also in 1994, just before we made the World Trade Organization, the United States, Canada, and Mexico agree to create a trade bloc, which is called the North American Free Trade Agreement. This eliminates all tariffs within our North American border. First introduced by Ronald Reagan in 1980, it kind of skirted along until they picked it back. George H.W. Bush picked it back up in 88, and then Clinton passed it in 90. Well, Clinton pushed for it, and then everybody ratified it in 1994. And then we get to our modern age tariffs. And I actually just Googled it, and this is the first image that comes up when you just Google Donald Trump. and it's straight off of his Wikipedia page. So I figured that's good to use. So in the first round of Trump tariffs, it was back in 2018. In January 2018, he reintroduced, I'm saying reintroduced as like basically prior to 2018, we basically had left tariffs back in 1947 because we didn't really use them anymore. But this time he reintroduces tariffs with a tariff on solar panel and washing machines between 30 and 50%. This is basically pointed directly at China because China makes a lot of solar panels and washing machines apparently. And then a couple months later, he said we are going to put tariffs on steel and aluminum for all countries. And then this had a lot of people wondering what is the legality of all this. And now that we're in kind of the modern trade, we're going to get to our AI generated images on our slides here. But what's the legality of just one dude pronouncing these? Well, there was the precedent that they had already made, and now they have looked into it, and as far as making 2018 legitimate, they said the Trace Act of 1974 and the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, both of those acts say that negotiating tariffs are a matter of national security, and it gives the president authority to raise tariffs without limits. While it was kind of debated about whether or not these acts give him these powers, the debates are more just for show, and all these tariffs have been implemented. Back in 2018, using the tariffs that he had put on aluminum and steel, Trump renegotiates NAFTA into the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement. The formal agreements were reached on October 1st, 2018, with USMCA coming into effect July 1st of 2020. And 2020 had some other interesting things happen, and at the end of it, Trump was not reelected POTUS. So, pause on all this trade war stuff. Although there wasn't really a pause on any of these tariffs. The Chinese tariffs that were implemented in 2018 were mostly still there. A lot of other tariffs were still here until round 2 happened. In 2024, Donald Trump won again, and he has come back with even more tariffs, which has started a trade war. And all these images are obviously AI generated. I went to leonardo.ai and just typed in economic trade war. I really like this one. I can't. Is that Donald Trump here and Donald Trump here? I can't. It's like an SNL version. and then down here he's like fighting with communists. Like I don't know. But I actually really do like this one. I feel like all these people are actually involved in this somehow. But also I feel like besides Donald Trump, everyone could also just be easily made up. I don't know. So this time around, when you ask about the legality of just the president enabling tariffs, this time it was just the use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, which enables the president to regulate international commerce after declaring a national emergency. Trump declares a national emergency at the southern border of the United States. Literally the day he came into office, he declared a national emergency at the southern border, which instantaneously gave him all these powers. So as of the middle of, I'm recording this on March 17th, 2025. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I'm not wearing green. My birthday is March 15th. I'm like so out of my element right now. I don't remember the last time I didn't wear green on St. Patrick's Day. Anyway, where we're at. Chinese tariffs. There's a 20% tariff on all imports valued above $800. So that's the stipulation that valued above $800 is important because of basically Temu products, like all those small things that ship to America. They exclude any of those above $800 ones. Canada and Mexico has been very confusing over the last couple months because it's been like off again, on again, off again, on again. But as of now, 25% on all goods, excluding a 10% Canadian energy tariff. So basically, Canadian oil only gets tariffed 20 or 10%, and those are effective as of April 2nd, 2025. As of today, there was also an announcement that this would retain to there would also be retaliatory tariffs. Anything that Canada is imposing on the United States as of April 2nd would also be reimposed on Canada April 2nd. And then all imports, we were back to this 2025 we were back to this 2025 25% tariff on steel and aluminum. That was effective as of March 12th. And then these are my cute little things that I based all this off on. So yeah, that's the history of tariffs and how we got here.